Welcome to this mini episode of Alpine Intel's The Savvy Adjuster podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Bowles. This is a quick follow-up to our last episode, Hail Damage and Collateral Indicators. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, you can find it on your favorite podcast platform. Today, I'm joined again by my guests, Donan Principal Forensic Engineer Marvin Akins and HVACI Field Operations Manager Joe Brindley. This time, we're talking a little more about collateral indicators of certain weather events and how expert identification can help determine the actual cause of loss. Thanks for joining us again, Marvin and Joe. We talked a lot about hail in our last episode, so we won't focus too much on it here. But how about a quick review of how hail impacts might show up on collateral indicators? Marvin, let's start with you. Can we talk a little about hail?
Sure. Like we talked about in our main podcast, it was the collateral indicators are an indication of hail actually impacting the property. They're not necessarily an indication of hail damage. So they are the clue that basically tells us the size, the direction, and the density from which the hailstones fell. So they're very important in any hail study for a roof covering, or it may be siding as well. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be the roof, but they tell us a lot. They tell us, like I just mentioned, the 3Ds, but we have to know what these collateral indicators tell us, because it's very important, because what we're trying to get to is actually which direction did the hail come from and how big was the hail that impacted the property, because that all leads to, hey, could this hail have actually damaged this roof covering or this siding or not?
And Joe, how might hail impacts show up on collateral indicators when you're looking at HVAC equipment?
Well, a lot of times we're looking at, say, hail guards, whether it's more of a natural dent versus something sharp. You know, a lot of times you have lawn equipment, things like that, that'll damage units on a home that are on the ground. So we try to separate those.
And we're looking at things like dents on soft metals, anything else that...
Get the coverings, the top covers. Also, you know, you have insulation that's on your copper piping, you know, your refrigerant piping. You'll see some tears there too, if it's missing or not, things like that.
Okay, Marvin, let's talk some about wind.
Okay, so as in with a hail event that we talked about directionality and so forth, we got the same thing that can happen with a wind event. Now, wind events can be anything. We've been seeing quite a few of these up in the Midwest and so forth, these derechos, okay, which is just a high wind event that happens over 100 plus miles and can do a lot of damage. Or it could be a tornado or even a hurricane. So when our engineers are at a property assessing, hey, was this property damaged by wind by any of these major events, we're looking for certain things on the house or the building that's going to tell us that it was actually impacted by high winds or severe winds, whatever term you want to use. And so we're looking at items that are lightly attached to the house. It could be a satellite dish, could be the gutters, downspouts, shutters on the house. We're looking at the trees in the yard. Are there any broken limbs in the trees? Are there any felled trees that are on the ground? Are the fences still upright? Okay. Do the fences lean in a certain direction? Are they on the ground? So it's any indication of stuff on the property that indicates that high winds affect us, and is the way everything may be blown, is it consistent with it being all blown in the same direction? Okay. If you got a vinyl siding on a house, guess what? That is, with these wind events, especially when we start talking about tornadoes and hurricanes, you also get this debris that gets in the wind as well, which I always call it windborne debris, because it's not flying, it ain't got wings, so it's the wind's pushing it along. And so you could have damage to the siding, holes in the siding that's blown off the house. Okay, is the siding that may be missing or detached from the house, is it all on the same side or is it on opposite sides? Okay, so we're looking at these different collaterals from wind to tell us hey, we did have a major wind event here. So could we have actual structural damage to the house, or is the roof covering damaged? Does everything line up that what we find, did wind actually cause the damage?
And Joe, when you're looking at HVAC equipment, what kind of wind collateral indicators are you looking for?
Well, we're basically looking for the same thing that Marvin talked about. What wind will usually do to your air conditioning systems is it'll shift it. That the wind will actually pick it and move it a little bit, which can, dent copper, make kinks in copper, tear loose wiring that goes into the systems. Those are all things that we look for to see if the wind has actually moved the equipment.
And Joe, are there any indicators of flooding that you would be able to see when you're looking at HVAC equipment?
Oh, sure. You can usually see a water line, called dirty water line that you can see in the coil, in the bottoms of the coils. A lot of times there'll be, if that flood event, carried mud or debris with it, you'll be able to see, it'll get impacted into the coil, and you'll be able to see exactly about how far the water came up. You can also look inside of the cabinets of these systems that are outside and usually see a water line on the inside. Sometimes it gets high enough to affect the wiring connections. Most of the time it doesn't, but you can definitely tell. There's indicators how high that water got.
And Marvin, is there anything that our listeners need to know about structural issues and flooding?
Oh, sure. When we get called out for a flood project, is, as I mentioned a while ago, is that when we get there, we're looking for collaterals. So our engineers are trained to basically, hey, what collaterals on the property indicate that we actually had a flood event here? Okay, so like Joe mentioned, we're looking for a high water line. So how high did the water get up on the building? Okay, and that there'll be a debris. If it property actually flooded, it's going to leave a debris line on that house. So we're looking for that. We're looking for, is there any type of erosion around the foundation? Because if that water is moving fast enough, as it goes around the corners of the house, it can erode and actually what we call scour the soil out from under the building. And when it does that, that can lead to some pretty significant structural damage. So we're looking for, when you get one of these major hurricanes, is that we always, it's not just an essence of flooding, it's an essence of storm surge if you're on the beach. So as that storm surge comes on land, then all of a sudden you get all this debris that gets caught up in the storm surge, and it can leave a debris field. Okay, so looking at aerial photographs after a hurricane or storm surge event, we're looking that, is this house within the debris field that was left by the flooding, or is it outside of that debris field? So yes, there's several different collaterals that our engineers look for when they're trying to assess, was the damage being claimed for on this house, was it actually caused by flood or not?
That is all fascinating information, and I hope that our listeners are really learning the things they need to know. Thank you for joining us for this mini episode. During the next Savvy Adjuster podcast, my co-host Chris Nichols will facilitate a discussion about how assessments can help with your large loss claims. If you're interested in learning more about hail or other storm damage, collateral indicators, or getting an expert assessment on a product failure claim, check the show notes for additional Alpine Intel resources. We'll see you next time.